So the first thing I want to say, by the way, before we get into this, is that a visual aid is not the only way to, or a slideshow, sorry, is not the only kind of visual aid that you can show. I've had one student, I don't remember if I talked about this in the last lecture that we had, but I had one student once ask one of their classmates beforehand if they would, we had like a long table, like these like long 2-person desks in the classroom that we were using. He had one of their classmates lie down on the table and he demonstrated CPR. So he had his friend lie down on the table and then he demonstrated CPR techniques on that person. And that was his visual aid. I had another student who was talking about synesthesia. He had a form of synesthesia called perfect pitch, where he could like any sort of like sound, like a, or like a whatever it might be, like a car backing up, or like a truck backing up, like that high pitched sound. He'd be able to tell you exactly what note it was. So he actually did have a visual aid, a slideshow presentation. But then what he also did, he blindfolded himself, and then he also actually asked for a volunteer from the audience. He didn't have one like pre-picked though, like the CPR guy. He asked, hey, does anybody want to come up here and try this? And then one person, he brought somebody up. He blindfolded himself, and he had pulled up a virtual piano online on the projector, and he just had the classmate play random notes, and he could tell you every single note that person was playing. That by itself could have constituted a visual aid presentation without his needing to use the slideshow. So it really just depends on what your needs are. But if you are using a slideshow, and predominantly people for these visual aid speeches, they use a slideshow. For the most part, they use Google Slides, but you have people using Microsoft PowerPoint. You have some people using Prezi, some people using Keynote. PowerPoints and Google Slides is the one that I'm most familiar with. I've done some work on Prezi, and I don't know Keynote at all. So if you have technical issues with those, you're going to have to go to OIT. I'll probably be able to help you with PowerPoints and Google Slides. Prezi and Keynote, I really have no. It would be like my guess as good as yours in terms of how to fix issues. So the first thing that I want to ask, can you guys hear me all right? Okay, perfect. Thanks, Cole. And then can you guys see my screen here? It's a slideshow that says using a visual aid. Perfect. All right, cool. So this is going to sort of take you through the do's and don'ts when you're making a slideshow presentation. All right. Okay, so some basic guides to using a visual aid in your speech. Let me move this thing here. Okay. The first thing that you absolutely don't want to do is this. All right. Full sentences, like 19 points on one slide. That's an immediate don't. All right. The problem with something like this is that, first of all, your classmates are going to be spending all of their time reading the speech or reading the information on the slide rather than listening to your speech. All right. The other thing is that I can only assume, or that it only really happens when people write slides like this. It's because they're going to be completely, it doesn't happen often, but people are completely reading off their visual aid despite my showing them this slide and telling them to exactly not do that. All right. So the way that you structure the visual aid the way that you structure the visual aid, which is meant to assist you in your speech, is very important because it can really be a focal point for people when you're delivering your speech. In this presentation, I'm going to go over some do's and don'ts for how to structure the visual aid accompaniments of your speech. One of the biggest no-nos is to turn your back to your audience to fully read off a slide. It's a huge pain in the ass, and I feel like you're implying that I can't read. You see how annoying that is? It's really annoying to sit and listen to somebody read off their speech. Read off the visual aid for their speech. Don't do that, all right? What you want to do is have, I would say maybe 3 to maximum 5 points on a visual aid on a slide, and really you want to keep it around 3 or 4. Even 5, you're getting into too many bullet points territory, just move it to the next slide. You're not limited in how many pages and how many different slides you can make for your slideshow. Just move it over. Make it easy as possible for people to read, and do not write in full sentences that are going to require your audience to read those sentences to know what you're talking about, or that are going to distract them because they're reading the sentences from looking at you while you're explaining what it is. Because even if they're fully written out sentences, chances are you're still going to have to be explaining stuff. And so they're not going to be getting that. They're not going to be focusing on both things if they're trying to read what you have written on your visual aid. Okay? Moving on. When we talk about images on slides, what you exactly don't want to do is saturate your slide with lots of images, because it gets really hard to focus on one thing. Your text gets obscured. It gets hard to figure out a good layout to show both your text and your images if you're going to use both. And then also, people have no idea what are you going to look at. Are you showing 12 different photos of the same thing? Chances are that's unnecessary. You find the best examples of the thing that you're gonna show people, unless what you're trying to show people are photos of buff animals, in which case people need to see every single example of a really buff animal because it's hilarious. I'm just kidding. There's no excuse. Don't do that. But these are objectively hilarious. All right. For real though, folks. Don't oversaturate. It looks corny. It is corny. You want to be really tasteful with how you present the visual information on your speech. When you choose your text, your background, the sort of flavor of your slides, don't do like bright blue neon with like white font. You want to make the slide visually pleasing to take a look at. You don't want to make it a train wreck, so you want things to be tastefully chosen, right? Moving on, I've got an awesome video for you guys. Oh, wait, what? Inserted URL is not from a currently supported video provider. Oh no, what am I gonna do? I was so reliant on this video. In that situation, I can't help you guys. If you run into an issue with an embedded image or an embedded video, an embedded sound, and it's not working for you, and you don't have a contingency, then I just have to dock you those points for effective use of a visual aid, and that's going to be unfortunate, especially if the rest of your presentation is really, really well done, but you have an embedded video or an embedded whatever piece of media that doesn't work. That's going to sort of pull the bottom out from under your grade, and you absolutely don't want that. Okay, and then too much text is also is bad, but don't do this. Don't put like one word things on your slideshow. This is also like a really common one that happens for some reason, where people just put like the only thing they put on the slideshow is like the main point that they're talking about, or something equally like irrelevant. That doesn't tell us anything. If you're gonna have text on the slideshow, it should encapsulate, like paraphrase the thing that you're trying to talk about. So while you don't want like full run-on sentence, you're allowed to give us a sentence. That's totally fine. That's common sense. So you just sort of want to be reasonable. And again, like I said, you don't want to don't do weird stuff with your, don't give me white font on something that's already something that's going to be difficult to read. All of your neon fonts are just going to be very annoying to look at, especially if you combine them with something where it's illegible. I've only had one or two situations where somebody used a weird blue neon background. I don't even know how to do that. Color. Let's take a look at colors. what's a really annoying one? Like, don't do that. Like, don't do that. That's hard to look at. All right, that's very difficult to look at. So you want to make it like, and then you lose out, especially even if you oh, whoops, there we go. If you make like white font on this, it's still like, it hurts my eyes to look at. You don't want to be doing that. Okay, you want your slideshow to be tastefully done. That's pretty much it. And if you just rely on the basic, like if you just go to design and you let PowerPoint like pick out a design package for you, it sort of like fixes all your problems immediately, because they've chosen things that are easily legible. All right. So that's it for that. I do want to get into the next portion of the class. So what we're now going to take a look at, and I'm going to apologize in advance because the audio on it is actually pretty quiet, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. So earlier today, I recorded a visual aid presentation, an example of a visual aid speech for you guys. I had to stand far back from the microphone, and this is already a crappy microphone, so it's a little bit difficult to hear. If you have headphones, I suggest you use headphones or turn up your speakers a little bit. You can hear me. It's a little bit quiet, and I apologize for that. I tried to turn up the volume as much as possible, but it still turned out very, very quiet, and that's a mechanical issue with the specific mic that I'm using, and I don't actually have access to a better one on this computer. So that's just what I had to work with. In those situations, and I'll talk about it after we watch the speech, if you're delivering your speech and it's obvious that you're speaking in a normal volume, I won't dock you points for being quiet because of this, because we're using computer tech in order to be able to hear each other, and there's a million different volume controls from your mic to your computer to my computer to like the specific speaker that I'm listening to something on, whether or not I'm using headphones, blah, blah, blah. There's a million different variables. So I won't dock you points for the volume portion of your rubric. The only time I will dock you points through like when we're doing an online class is if you're obviously being like, all right, guys, today is my speech, and this is what I'm going to be talking about, because then you're obviously not speaking loudly, and in a classroom environment, nobody's going to be able to hear you either way, past the front row, which is exactly what you don't want. So it's difficult to not meet those criteria, but it is possible. In general, everybody should do fine. Like nobody should be getting docked points on volume over in a web-based class. But it is possible, all right? But just speak as loudly as if you're a quiet speaker, speak in a voice where you think that an entire classroom would be able to hear you. Don't yell to be funny. That's a total Ramsey move, all right? All right. So without further ado, let's get into that portion of it.
Can anybody tell me what the most popular instrument in recorded musical history is? If you guess the computer, you're close, but it's actually beaten out by the electric guitar. Today we're going to talk about the electric guitar, and more specifically, we are going to talk about sort of why the electric guitar was invented, why was it necessary, its history. We are also going to discuss the differences between acoustic guitars and electric guitars, and finally we're going to take a look at how an electric guitar actually produces a sound. So first of all, let's talk about the history of the electric guitar. What is the electric guitar? So it was invented in 1931 by a man named George Beauchamp. It had this original sort of frying pan looking shape. I believe it was called the frying pan guitar. And it was necessary for this exact scenario. So In the early 20th century, big band jazz was very popular, but the problem was that acoustic guitars couldn't really be used in these big band jazz situations because they simply couldn't be heard over the brass and the drums. And so the electric guitar was invented. It skyrocketed into popularity in the 1950s and 60s by artists such as Elvis, the Beatles, Eric Clapton, so on and so forth. And currently there are all sorts of different shapes, sizes, colors, functions for electric guitars, and it's used in a multitude of different genres. But that doesn't really address what an electric guitar is. So first of all, let's take a look at the components which make up an electric guitar. This is a standard Fender Telecaster, one of the most popular shapes of electric guitars. Here's the body. Those are, of course, the strings, the neck. People often confuse the body and the neck. They think, or they'll call the body the head or something like that. The neck features the fretboard and frets, and depressing the strings on individual frets is actually what creates the different notes on an electric guitar. The headstock features the machine heads or tuning pegs. You can call them either or. The bridge and the pickups we want to pay special attention to because they're going to come up later, and they're really important with how guitars function. And then, of course, there's the input jack. And then finally, you can't have an electric guitar without the mighty guitar amp, and of course, the trusty input cable. All right, now we've taken a look at the components of an electric guitar. Before we discuss how it produces a sound, let's take a look at the difference between acoustic guitars and electric guitars. Now, an acoustic guitar, remember how we were just talking about the bridge? A bridge is a really important part of a guitar because what happens when you pluck a string, especially in an acoustic guitar, is it vibrates down the body of the guitar and through the bridge. In an acoustic guitar, there are two what you call soundboards inside an echo chamber and a sound hole, which is hilarious, which is a hilarious name to call what it is, but that is what it is. So what happens when you play the string on an acoustic guitar, it vibrates, goes down the bridge vibrates at that exact frequency of the string, that vibration resonates throughout the echo chamber and goes out through the sound hole, and that's what you're hearing when you pluck an acoustic guitar. But that is not how an electric guitar works. It's actually, besides the vibrating string, completely different. So how does an electric guitar work? Let's take a look. So remember those pickups that we talked about earlier? We were talking about the bridge and we were talking about the pickups. According to Seymour Duncan, a major manufacturer of guitar pickups, a guitar pickup is a special kind of magnet which is very tightly wound by machine with copper wire. And so what happens is that the combination of this magnet and these wires produce an electromagnetic field. So what's kind of cool is that when you pluck an electric guitar string, it still vibrates at the same frequency that an acoustic guitar string would vibrate at, but the difference is that it's causing a disturbance in that electromagnetic frequency, in that electromagnetic field that the pickups are producing. That disturbance is channeled through the pickups, through the input jack that we took a look at earlier, through the guitar cable, and then into the amplifier. What happens then is that is interpreted by the amplifier as an electronic signal, which is what it is. The amplifier, so named, does its job by hiking up the, you wonder why an electric guitar doesn't need to be plugged in. Some do actually, some require batteries, but it's because they produce an electronic signal that's very, very weak. So the amplifier amplifies it. And then you see all these knobs, you can fiddle with them to change what the quality of that signal is. It passes through all those different channels of an amplifier and finally goes into the sound cone. Now the sound cone, what it does is that it takes that electronic signal, reinterprets it as a sound, again, a specific frequency, and that driver vibrates at the exact frequency of the sound that you're trying to produce. That frequency, that driver moves the air around it, and that is what produces the sound that you're hearing through the electric guitar. Pretty cool, right? All right. So in this speech, we've taken a look at the history of the electric guitar. We've taken a look at how the electric guitar is different from the acoustic guitar, and we've talked about how and we've talked about how the electric guitar actually produces a sound. Now, guitars are losing popularity in popular music in favor of computers. If you talk about modern history, computers are definitely more popular for creating music, but the guitar still has a very, very strong place, and only the future will be able to tell how guitars will impact music. Thank you.
Okay, folks. I know that was a little bit difficult to hear, right? Somewhat. All right. You're allowed to speak, by the way. You don't have to, but you're allowed to speak, by the way, if you want to. So, yeah, I apologize for how difficult that was to hear. I will upload that for you guys if you want to take a look at it later. I'm going to upload it through Kaltura so that it generates accurate closed captions. And then I'll upload it for you guys onto our Blackboard folder, onto our Blackboard class. Okay, so what we're going to do now, sorry, let me check. I couldn't hear it at all. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got amplified speakers set up to my computer and I could not hear it, but the music tones were so loud comparatively that it kind of scared me a few times.
I apologize for that. I figured that might be the case. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. So I'll walk you guys through it. I'll walk you guys through it, and then what I'm actually going to do, like I said, so I'm actually like recording this lecture. I'll upload it for you guys to be able to check out later, and then if you want, what you can do is, if you didn't get a chance to hear it properly, or you weren't admitted into the Zoom meeting yet when I went through it, when I went through the speech, you can go back and rewatch it and follow along with the grading in the YouTube video that I'm going to upload of this lecture. All right, just so it makes a little bit more sense to you guys. And then I'm going to try and figure out how to get the volume up. Were you guys, when I was streaming for you guys on YouTube, did you guys have an issue hearing me, or do you have an issue hearing me now?
I did not have an issue with the YouTube hearing or hearing you now. You're fine now.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm assuming it just has to do with the distance that I was standing away from the mic. So yeah, I apologize for that. Let's just go through it right now as best as we can, and I'm gonna explain every single thing that I'm doing. And yeah, if you want to take a look at it later, you can. Especially if you didn't. Especially if you weren't able to follow along with it now. Okay, so this is our rubric. This is the exact one that is taken from the supplemental information packet provided by the Communications and Journalism Department. I am going to, the places where, this is not the one that you guys are going to see when I give you your grades back. What I've done is I've sort of improved on it because I think this one is absolutely terrible. I've made it easier for me to grade on. I've also made it so that each category, like each criteria within each competency, is more clearly explained according to my requirements for this class. All right. But I'll go back. I'll as we go through this. I don't have that one on this computer. It's on my desktop, and I still haven't. Completely. It's the actual criteria are done. It just doesn't look super nice. I need to figure out the layout of it because what I'm also going to do is every time I give you guys speech grades back, the second page of the PDF will always be the grade conversion. So you'll be able to take a look at the grade for the speech you got and then immediately convert it, which I think is pretty helpful. Which is a feature that I don't have on this specific rubric. All right. But all right, let's begin. So competency 1, assignment specifics, evidence of prep and evidence of practice. The way that I do these grades is based on two things. One, when you were delivering your speech, did you stop in the middle of a main point and just be like, oh, that's sort of all I have for this, so I'm just going to move on to another point? Or be like, that's all I have for this and that's the end of my speech. I've had both situations happen. In that case, you definitely don't get the points for prep and practice. The other thing, do you guys remember what the time limit that I gave you for your speeches is? Okay, so between 4 to 6 minutes, right? So it's 5 minutes with 1 minute on either side, if you want to remember it that way. This speech is 6 minutes and 36 seconds long. In this case, based on the time limit alone, I would be losing points for prep, practice, and specified time. The only points that I'd be getting for this speech are for meeting the assignment requirements, because it's an informative speech. The visual aid speech is an informative. It's exactly the same as our informative speech, except with a visual aid component. But yeah, so somebody in the previous class asked me, oh, well, you put the effort into making a visual aid and to doing all of that sort of thing. So unfortunately, and I'll tell you guys the same thing that I told them, I've actually run into trouble with the department for being a very lenient grader. Like, I'm considered the most lenient grader in the department. Like, people get crucified in their public speeches. So, like, me docking you points on this is something that, or like me, for docking you big points for time limit, for exceeding the time limit and stuff like that. That's not something that I'm going to be flexible on, because like, that's just how it works. Like, that's just, what you're going to find with a lot of these criteria is that they're intertwined with each other. In a perfect world, I would not use this rubric, but I'm not allowed by the department to not use this rubric. I ask every semester, and every semester I get told no. So that's just sort of how it works. But as we go through this, I'll sort of show you it's going to be all right in the end, but don't freak out, like, because you see it too. But also, I'm using this as an example because I want you guys to make your speech as honed and as polished as possible. And when you do that, you don't run into these kinds of situations where you don't meet the time limit, so you're reading off note cards. That's another big one. If you're reading complete sentences off your note cards, you get points deducted from so many different criteria across many different competencies. So that's one of those things, and you're going to have to get familiar with the rubric to know where you're going to run into those kinds of pitfalls. So moving on. Okay, the introduction. Attention gaining material. The first thing I did, I said, do you know what the most popular instrument in recorded music history is? If you thought it was the computer, you're close, but it's actually the electric guitar. That's a good opener. All right, it's not going to light the world on fire. It's not completely revolutionary, but it's not, hi, my name is Ramsey, and my speech is about guitars. Don't do that. Please don't do that, okay? It happens so much, especially in the classroom situation. You guys have the luxury of being able to record your speech. Don't do, hi, my name is whatever, and this is my speech as your opener. You're going to lose those points, all right? So I get points for that. Thesis, specific purpose. My speech is about guitar, and I'm going to be talking about the history of guitars, as well as how a guitar produces a sound. Okay? Specific purpose, addressed. All right? Relevance material. I brought up that guitars are used heavily in popular music. It was weak. I would consider that I didn't really address making it relevant to my audience. I didn't, maybe I could have brought up a popular song or examples of two popular songs, one that uses guitar and one that doesn't, something like that. That would have made it a lot more relevant to my audience. I wouldn't give myself the points there for that. I previewed the points, and I had an effective transition into the body. What did I say here?
Acoustic guitars and electric guitars. And finally, we're going to take a look at how an electric guitar actually produces a sound. So first of all, let's talk about the history of the electric guitar.
There, I said, so first of all, let's talk about the history of the electric guitar. I transitioned from my introduction into my first main point. That's all that you need. So between main points 1, 2, and 3, you're going to need a logical connection between each one of those points. Between the introduction and your first main point, you haven't started explaining, breaking down the thesis, the focus of your speech. So that conceptual connection doesn't really need to exist. You just need to address that you're talking about your first main point now. I've done that, so I get the points for that, and you will too, all right? So in that situation, I'd get a 4, Okay? Moving on to competency 3, good information. Was anybody able to, if you were able to hear the speech, what did you think of the information that I presented? Was it relevant to the thesis? Was it relevant to the topic of the speech? I'm getting a thumbs up from Cole. Okay, so this one, I'll break it down using different criteria. Okay, so the information, I would say, was good. The problem was that I only had one citation. In the third point, I said, according to Seymour Duncan, a popular, one of the major manufacturers of... It's telling my connection is unstable, by the way. Can you guys still hear and see me? Am I back? Am I good? All right, perfect. Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, my screen just froze there for a second. So what I didn't do was cite properly. I only had one citation, so I wouldn't get the points there. Now, what saves me here is that the information was relevant, okay? Because otherwise, you'd lose 2 points off of this third competency here, okay? But if your information is relevant, then it really mitigates the damage done by not having appropriate citations or citing appropriately, okay? So main points clear and elaborated, yes, but I wouldn't give myself the points for the citations, and if I don't have citations, I can't cite them properly. Even if my only citation was cited well, it's still, you're not really gonna get points for that. Okay, so here I get 3 points. Now, what you're also going to notice, by the way, and this is one of the things about this rubric, is that competency 3, for example, only has 4 criteria. But I gave myself a 3 despite having 2 check marks. That's because by default, if you give your speech, you have 1 point. So these check marks just build on that 1 point. All right. Again, it's just one of the quirks of this rubric. Okay. Moving on to competency 4, observable organizational pattern. I talked about the history of the electric guitar. I talked about the differences between the acoustic guitar and the electric guitar. And I talked about how an electric guitar produces a sound. I said I was going to talk about those things. I talked about those things. And in my conclusion, I recapitulated that I talked about those things. That's clear. I transitioned clearly between each of those main points, right? If you have all of that, your speech is organized clearly. Now, the specific organizational style that I used is called a topical style, because it doesn't matter if I talk about the difference between acoustic and electric guitars, or how a guitar produces a sound, or the history of electric guitars. You don't need to know one piece of information before you know another, all right? If that were the case, it would be either a cause and effect style or a ranked ordinal style, okay? But it wasn't that. It was a topical style. I kept it organized. I kept it relevant. I get the points for those. All right. Internal transitions, effective transitions. Now that we've talked about, or what did I say for the first one? I talked about the history of the electric guitar, and I said, but that doesn't really tell you what an electric guitar is. To know what an electric guitar is, we first have to look at the components. That's an effective transition. All right, that's what I mean. That's a good, robust transition that logically ties the idea of main point 1 to main point 2. All right, you do that, you get those points. Transition from body into conclusion. I don't know if you can hear it, but
guitar, we've taken a look at how the electric guitar. Pretty cool, right? All right, so in this speech, we've taken a look at...
I just said, pretty cool, right? So in this speech, the only transition between the body and conclusion is my use of the word so. Not an effective transition. I wouldn't get the points for that. Okay? I summarized my points, and at the end, what did I say?
The history of the electric guitar. We've taken a look at how the electric guitar is different from the acoustic guitar, and we've talked about how the electric guitar actually produces a sound. Now, guitars are losing popularity in popular music in favor of computers. If you talk about modern history, computers are definitely more popular for creating music, but the guitar still has a very, very strong place, and only the future will be able to tell how guitars will impact music. Thank you.
So only the future will be able to tell how guitars impact music. That is a definitive final statement. Again, it's not crazy. It's not going to light the world on fire. It's not the most poignant turn of phrase you've ever heard in your life. But what it tells me is that this is the end of my speech. This is what I talked about, and this is the thought that I want to leave you with at the end of my speech. We don't know how guitars are going to impact the future of music. Done. There, you do that, you get those points. And that is 4 points here for your observable organizational pattern. Now, language. Bias-sensitive language. Did my language marginalize any groups, any audience members? Did I make anybody feel crappy or anything like that? It's not really the kind of speech that's going to do something like that. There are lots of, when people talk about, for example, when people talk about recycling and throwing away trash, for example, it can be like, you can come off as very standoffish, not liking people who throw away, who litter and stuff like that. It can make people feel marginalized. That's not what you're trying to do, all right? And you want to be careful about that, especially if you're trying to persuade people, even if that's your opinion, okay? You don't want people to feel antagonized by you, so you don't want to do that. That's not really relevant to my speech, so I would just get the points for that, I never really run the risk of doing that, nor do I do it. If somebody actually has an example of me doing that during the speech, let me know. But as far as I can tell, to my own interpretation and analysis, I never do that. Okay? Formal level. This is so it says no you slang here. You can absolutely use pronouns and personal pronouns in your speeches. Your, my, his, her, their, you, me, them, we. That's all totally fine. I don't think it breaks formality. I don't know why the rubric says that. The new rubric that I have for you guys, it absolutely doesn't say that, so I don't want you to worry about that. But did people think there was an observable difference between the way that I delivered my speech and the way that I'm speaking to you right now, the way that I'm delivering this lecture right now? There wasn't really a big difference. I didn't approach it formally. I approached it a lot more casually. And I think, honestly, there's something to be said for that. Had my speech been more polished, right? And let me tell you about this speech, by the way. So I wrote the speech about 3 years ago, so I'm pretty familiar with it. But the thing is that I didn't practice it. So I read it. So I sort of went through, I delivered the speech I think once or twice, about halfway. And then the speech that you guys saw was my third take for the speech. All right, so it wasn't really practiced. I didn't spend time. I didn't write down notes and hone it and perfect it. It was essentially tantamount to a cold read. All right, and we'll see at the end. I still my grade does not suffer that much, but it could have been a lot better. It could have been a lot better. All right, I could have wound up with a much higher grade than I'll end up giving myself here, if I had just prepped and practiced and sort of made it a lot finer. Because it's fine if you want to approach your speech in a way that is personable and casual, rather than standing up here and being like, where do speeches come from? You don't have to do that sort of thing. But it was too casual. My speech was too casual, too similar to the way that I speak. Not enough of a difference between this particular lecture and the presentation that I gave. And this lecture that I'm giving you now, again, is not a memorized thing. It's me looking at the information and analyzing it in real time with you guys, okay, based on my own experience and expertise, all right? You don't want to do that with your speech. You want it to be honed and you want it to sound like a speech. And we're going to take a look later at a speech done by President Barack Obama, where he has a very casual tone, but it's a very structured narrative. All right, he's laser focused with how he tells the story that he's telling. All right, so I wouldn't give myself the points for formality. See, what I did not do is draw attention to myself. I wasn't like, oh my God, this speech is going so great, or oh my God, I'm so nervous right now, or holy crap, I forgot what I was gonna say. Never do stuff like that. Even if you forgot what you were gonna say, take a moment, compose yourself, and launch back into your speech. All right. So I get the points here. Did anybody pick up on what my verbal filler is in my speech? It's the word so. I say the word so as a verbal filler, you know? For some people it's like, for some people it's okay, for some people it's, you know. Mine is so, right? It's just this like, it's this like hook word that I use when like one idea is flailing and I need a second before I grab onto the next idea because I don't know what I'm going to say. So I say so, okay? And there I get 3 points for this. Now we get into the delivery side of things. If you see at the top there, it says no reading, no reading, no reading. Again, that's directly from the paper version of the rubric. I didn't have a teleprompter. I didn't have note cards. Actually, to my detriment, I didn't have note cards because you're supposed to use note cards. So, and somebody in the previous class said, well, you had a visual aid presentation. But just like I showed you in the first slideshow that I showed you, if we take a look at this, I didn't sit here and say, invented in 1931 by George Beauchamp, utilized by jazz musicians who wanted to be heard in big band situations. Then I would be like reading off the material. I didn't do that, right? I didn't do that. I paraphrased what was, the slide contained a paraphrasing of the concept that I was trying to explain. That's really what you want to go for in your slides and your slideshows, okay? So I wasn't reading off anything. My rate, was I in the Goldilocks zone? Was I speaking too quickly? Was I speaking too slowly? I think I was speaking maybe too slowly, but for the most part, I think I was comprehensible. Somebody in the previous class said, well, you know, if you had spoken more quickly, wouldn't you have shaved off those 30 seconds that, you know, are losing you that are losing you points for prep and practice? I never want you to think about it that way, because 30 seconds is actually a significant amount of time to try and shave off by speaking more quickly, because there's like a fall off to how quickly you can say a word before you start like slurring words together or being completely unintelligible, okay? So I don't want you to be like, well, the electric guitar was invented in 1931 by George Beauchamp, and they use it in big band jazz situations because acoustic guitar is going to be heard. You know, it sounds stupid. It's incomprehensible. Nobody's going to have any idea what you're talking about. So, you know, you don't want to do that. If you're running long on time, what you do is you cut out information or you practice your speech more. Because what I was doing, I was using verbal fillers, I was using vocalic fillers, and I was going back and re-explaining things that I was explaining in a different way, which is not necessary, right? You practice your speech, you write it in a way, you write a good example for the idea that you're trying to convey, and you state it once, that's it, okay? You're not a car salesman trying to have a conversation between you and a customer trying to explain yourself. That's not what the speech is, all right? It should be focused, and it should be, you know, it's one example, you say it, you picked a good example that tells people what you mean, and that's it. All right, you move on. Expressiveness, changes in pitch. Was I monotonous? Was I dynamic? I think in general, like, I would give myself points for dynamism. I wasn't, you know, the guitar was invented in 1931 by George Beauchamp. There are a multitude of electric guitars. Unless you're doing that, you're going to get the points for expressiveness and changes in pitch. And again, what I was talking about earlier, intensity and volume. If you were sitting here and reading very quietly, I'm like, I can't really hear what you're saying, then you lose points there. But if you're clearly standing in your room speaking at a normal, like speaking at a rate, at a volume that if we were in a classroom, the person at the back of the room would be able to hear you clearly, then I'll give you the points for that. You know, that's going to be a really easy one to get in the online format. Pronunciation, competency 7, grammar. I've said this before. I'm not going to knock you guys on being like, actually, that should have been expressed in the subjunctive mood, or like, oh, actually, whom is appropriate there rather than whom, or rather than who, or like using, you know, whatever. I can't think of the third example that I wanted to use, but just really specific stuff like that. Saying, for example, the field I will be sitting in rather than the field in which I will be sitting. I won't bust you on things like that. That's not the kind of thing that I'm looking at. If your slides have glaring spelling errors, or if you're making, or if you're confusing tenses, if you're going back and forth a lot between tenses during your speech, that's the only time I'll knock you for grammar. Clarity, not reading or memorized rhythm. Are you articulate? You know, are you slurring your words? Are you using, are you being, you know, are you clearly being like, the definition of the electric guitar is so-and-so. You know, if you're like looking up and obviously reciting from memory, that's the only time you'll get knocked for articulation. Now here, delivery and no vocalic fillers, that's where I'm going to lose a lot of points. Because again, I went back and tried to re-explain ideas. I used a lot of vocalic fillers. So there, you would get points knocked off. 3 there. And finally, competency 8, nonverbal supported presentation, eye contact with the audience. Unless you're staring straight into the camera the entire time that you're delivering your speech, you're going to get the points for that immediately. In the actual classroom scenario, what you guys later on, once we move back into live classes and stuff like that, or I mean for the next time you're giving a speech in a live class, people who are nervous tend to like burn a hole through their professor's skull. You don't want to do that. Like, it's fine and I'm used to it, but it's still awkward when somebody's just like staring at you as they're reciting their speech. It feels weird, you know, and you'll see, like, I'll look away to sort of like prompt you to look away because it gets really intense. Okay. Good use of note cards. I wouldn't get good use of note cards there because I didn't use note cards and my speech was weaker for it. No complete sentences on card. Again, I wouldn't get the points there because I didn't use note cards at all. Appearance. So right now, what I have is business casual. Essentially, if you don't look like a slob when you're giving your speech, even if you're not wearing, like, I would rather you wear something with a collar. I'm not going to be explicit about it. Just don't be in PJs. Don't be in something that is absurdly informal. Okay, don't be wearing a hat. Okay, just look like if your grandmother was coming over, that she wouldn't chastise you for looking like a slob. Like, just keep that in mind. All right, that's really the only look that I'm going for. I'm not going to require you guys to wear button downs or like formal, like whatever suits and things like that. And for women, you're not going to be like required to be in like a whatever, or like in a suit, or like in a whatever, like a office like shirt, like blouse and skirt type thing. Or I mean, I don't know women's wear, but you know what I mean. I'm not going to require that, but just use your own interpretation of what you think business casual sounds like. Okay. And then appropriate use of gesture and facial expressions. Are you being completely stone-faced? Are your facial expressions and hand gestures enhancing your speech, or is it really distracting and you're making a lot of weird faces like, oh, the electric guitar was invented in 1931, surprise, surprise. Don't do stuff like that, and you'll just get the points for that. So 3 points there. So if we tally the whole thing up, so if we tally the whole thing up, right? So 6, 9, 13, 16, 21, 24, 27. So overall, that's a 27. It seems grievous. You've lost 13 points. But actually, if we take a look at the grading scale here, 27. So by the way, so the informative speech and the visual aid speech are worth 100 points each. Your fishbowl and your symposium are worth 150 points and 200 points respectively. So you need to pay attention to how many points something is worth when you're looking at the conversion, because like if you get a 27 on your 150 on your fishbowl, and you're going down here and you're looking and you're like 84, what, or you know, or whatever it might be. 84 out of 150, obviously that's not the grade that you're getting. You want to look in this column here. This speech is worth, the visual aid speech is worth 100 points. So 27 is equal to an 84, which is equal to a B. By the way, these letter grades here on the supplemental information packet are wrong. Your rubric will have the correct ones. And at UAF, 80 to 82 is a B minus, 83 to 86 is a B, 87 to 89 is a B plus, 90 to 92 is an A minus, and then 93 onwards is an A. And there's no A pluses. So an A gets you a 4.0 GPA. So it's 93 and onwards where you get an A. The new rubric has that. The correct letter grades associated with the correct percentage on it. So here, 27 out of 40, you get an 84% on your grade. That's a B. All right. So all things considered, the speech is worth 10% of your total grade. So you're only getting 1.6% knocked off your total grade, and that's for a speech that I did. That's for a speech that I did not practice at all, did not write notes for, that I just delivered today, and I was able to score a 27 out of 40 on. All right, you give a speech like that, that's the sort of grade you're gonna get. I want you guys to aim higher than that. I want you to have a more focused speech. I want you to write good notes for yourself. I want you to not confuse yourself. Okay, and I want you to write good examples, have proper citations, and that grade will easily be a 32, 33, 34 out of 40, and that's all you need to get an A in the class. All you need to get an A in the class is a 34. All right, that's very, very easy. Even if you're scoring A minuses, again, that's 0.9% off your total grade. It's still very, very, very possible to end up with an A in the class. I also later on will give you an extra credit opportunity to get 2% added onto your total grade, which really, and the extra credit is not designed to help you go from a B to an A, but it's designed to help you go from an A minus to an A if all you need is that little push, from a B to a B plus if all you need is that little push. So it's really, really easy to get a good grade in this class. So I want you guys to really focus on doing that. Now, your assignment for this upcoming week. So next week is spring break. Due this week will be a little PowerPoint assignment that I call the Museum of the Self. And I'll put the assignment requirements on Blackboard here later on today. But you're gonna upload. You're gonna make a presentation, either Google Slides, PowerPoint, Prezi, whatever you want, with 3 different photos on it, either photos that you've taken or photos that are relevant to you. And you're going to explain why you chose those 3 photos, why they're relevant, why they're precious memories, why this person means a lot to you, why did you choose to share a photo of your pet. Just explain why you chose to share this photo. You'll drop it off in your Google Drive folder, and also your visual aid outlines are also due by Sunday. I'm actually going to spend spring break editing those outlines, so you'll have them back at the end of spring break, and then the week that we get back from spring break, your visual aid presentations will be due that Sunday, that following Sunday, the Sunday following spring break. So I'm gonna I want you guys to get all of that work done beforehand so you can enjoy your spring break. Once you get back from spring break, the only thing you're gonna need to focus on is recording and uploading that visual aid presentation and making any changes that I've recommended with the edits. Does that sound good, folks? Anybody have any questions? Perf. All right, folks, if that's good for everybody, that's all I've got for you today.